Welcome to the channel. If you're new here, this is part of the Persistence Information Weave, or PIW, where we explore what survives long enough to shape what comes next. Today's video is titled Persistence by Constraint, and the central question is simple, but it has teeth. Why do some structures stop needing attention? Why do certain things demand constant energy, repair, and supervision just to remain themselves, while other things, once formed, can coast for ages, sometimes for billions of years, with almost no upkeep at all? When people talk about persistence, they often imagine it as strength, intensity, power, or durability. But persistence isn't intensity. Persistence is the ability to keep existing under the actual rules of the environment, and those rules show up as constraints. Some systems persist only because they are continuously maintained against the grain of nature. Other systems persist because the constraints favor their continued existence. The key distinction is whether persistence is being paid for moment by moment, or whether the system has dropped into a configuration where the universe itself does most of the stabilizing work. So we're going to split this into two big arcs. First, persistence by maintenance, where the structure is expensive and fragile and must be actively defended. That will take us through life, machines, civilizations, fusion reactions, and the human layer of models and institutions that require constant correction. Second, persistence by constraint, where the system is stabilized by deep physical restrictions, atoms, crystals, orbits, black holes, and even geological structures that were costly to form, but then become stubbornly durable once they exist. Section 1. Life persistence by maintenance. Life is the cleanest place to begin because life makes the cost visible. A living cell is not a stable thing in the way a rock is stable. A cell is more like a managed storm, a set of chemical reactions, membrane separations, electric potentials, transport pathways, and repair systems that must run continuously. If they stop, the cell doesn't merely pause, it collapses into chemistry. And that collapse is not evil or mysterious. It's the default direction of the environment. The moment the gradients can no longer be controlled, the structure dissolves. The maintenance burden shows up everywhere in biology. Your body temperature isn't a trait, it's a cost you pay. Your immune system isn't an ornament, it's a repair and defense budget that never gets to go off duty. Even at the smallest level, the cell is constantly correcting errors, replacing damaged components, and regulating concentrations. Proteins misfold, DNA gets damaged, membranes leak, ion gradients blur, and living systems persist only because they operate with ongoing feedback and continuous work. This is why life is so deeply tied to energy flow. Life is not just matter arranged in a pattern, it's matter arranged in a pattern that resists rearrangement. That resistance requires work. When you look at a living organism, you are looking at an entropy management strategy that is continuously purchasing order locally at the price of producing entropy globally. The organism exports disorder to keep internal structure from falling apart. That's the deal. And when the deal can't be paid because there is no energy or because the repair load exceeds the available budget, persistence fails. There's also a subtle but crucial point here. Biological persistence is not just about resisting decay, it's about surviving variation. Life persists across changes in temperature, pressure, resource availability, predators, disease, and competition. That means life builds maintenance systems not just for normal operation, but for stress. It carries redundancy, it carries extra capacity, it evolves layers of regulation that allow it to keep functioning even when the environment tries to knock it off balance. And all of that is maintenance cost. So when we say life persists, we are not saying life is stable. we are saying life is actively stabilized. The persistence is real, but it is purchased continuously. The living system is never done paying, and that makes life one of the most expensive forms of persistence the universe contains. Section 2. Machines' persistence by maintenance. Machines look tough, but machines are also maintenance creatures. A machine is matter assembled into a configuration that does useful work because it channels forces in a deliberate way. But deliberate channeling usually means tight tolerances, specific alignments, and controlled friction. And that means wear, drift, corrosion, and failure are not exceptions. They are guarantees. Even something as simple as a bicycle demonstrates this. Leave it outside long enough and it stops being a bicycle. Not because bicycles are weak, but because the environment steadily pushes matter toward equilibrium. Bearings seize, rubber cracks, metal oxidizes, lubricants evaporate or break down. The machine's function depends on details that the environment has no reason to preserve. The environment doesn't care about gears being smooth. The environment doesn't care about electrical contacts remaining clean. Those are not favored configurations by default. They require a human or a system to keep restoring them. When you move into advanced technology, the maintenance load increases rather than decreases. A computer is a machine that depends on extremely reliable control of electrons, timing, heat, and material purity. Dust is a threat. Humidity is a threat. Cosmic rays can be a threat. Thermal cycling creates stress fractures. Software itself becomes a maintenance domain because the machine is partly physical and partly informational. You don't just repair hardware. You patch code. You update dependencies. You correct interactions between components that were never tested together in the real world. Complex machines often fail not because one component breaks, but because the coordination layer becomes unstable. The important point is that machines are persistent only within a maintenance ecosystem. If you remove the ecosystem, the machine reverts. And what it reverts into is not nothing. It reverts into lower cost arrangements of matter. It becomes scrap, rust, dust, heat, and scattered components. Nature isn't punishing it. Nature is simply relaxing it back down the gradient. So machines are a clear example of persistence by maintenance. The structure does not persist because the universe enforces it. It persists because an external agent keeps reimposing the structure faster than the environment can erase it. If the reimposition stops, the structure fails. Section 3. Civilizations, persistence by maintenance. Civilizations are machines made out of humans, resources, and information. They are extremely capable and extremely fragile. Civilization persists only by constant coordination. Food systems, water systems, energy systems, transportation, communication, law enforcement, education, health, and governance. And if that sounds like a list of features, it's better understood as a list of maintenance budgets. A civilization must continuously prevent local failures from cascading. That requires redundancy, repair, and institutional memory. Roads must be maintained, power grids must be balanced, pipes must be replaced, public trust must be sustained, financial systems must be audited, and that is not a moral statement, it's a structural statement. Complex systems have more failure modes than simple ones. The more specialized the parts, the more tightly coupled the flows, the more sensitive the system becomes to disruptions. You can think of civilization as an enormous scaffolding that keeps millions of people living in a high-order state that the environment would not produce on its own. Cities don't spontaneously assemble. Food doesn't spontaneously distribute. Clean water doesn't spontaneously flow to the top floor of a building. Every one of those requires continuous work. And because the system is large, it also requires continuous legitimacy. people must believe the system is worth participating in. The informational layer matters because humans are not gears. Humans are agents who can withdraw cooperation. So civilizations carry a second maintenance domain, not just physical repair, but narrative repair, trust repair, and institutional repair. And here's a deeper link to persistence. Civilizations often fail not because they lose knowledge, but because their maintenance load grows faster than their resource intake. Maintenance costs rise as infrastructure ages. Complexity adds coordination overhead. Debt builds. Corruption grows. Trust erodes. The system becomes more expensive to keep stable. Eventually, the persistence threshold is crossed. The inputs can't pay for the repairs. When that happens, the system doesn't choose to collapse. It becomes unable to hold its shape. Civilization is persistence by maintenance at scale. It can last a long time, but it lasts because it never stops paying. Section 4. Fusion reactions, persistence by maintenance. Fusion is one of the most important examples because it looks like pure power, but it's actually constraint dependence. A fusion reaction does not happen because matter feels energetic. It happens only under a narrow range of conditions. You need temperature high enough for nuclei to overcome electrostatic repulsion, and you need confinement strong enough to keep them close, long enough for collisions to occur. That's a very demanding environment. That's why fusion doesn't just happen everywhere. Inside a star, fusion persists because gravity is continuously maintaining the pressure and density that allow the reaction to proceed. But note what that means. Fusion in stars is not a free-running engine. It's a balance between gravity pushing inward and pressure pushing outward. The star becomes a self-regulating system. If fusion output rises, pressure increases, and the core expands slightly, cooling the reaction rate. If fusion output drops, the core contracts, heating up and raising the reaction rate. This is a form of maintenance, but it's maintenance built into physics rather than intelligence. It is feedback stability. Yet fusion still belongs in the maintenance side because it depends on ongoing conditions. When the star can no longer maintain those conditions, because fuel distribution changes, because core composition shifts, because the star runs out of fusible material in the right configuration, the process ends. The reaction doesn't want to keep going. It keeps going only while the constraints hold. Once constraints drift outside the narrow corridor, fusion shuts down or transforms into another stage with different reactions and different requirements. This is why fusion is such a powerful metaphor for persistence. It shows that even incredibly energetic systems can be fragile if they require tight conditions. High energy does not equal high persistence. In fact, high energy often means high instability unless stabilized. Fusion persists only when a massive system can continuously keep it inside the allowed region. Section 5. Models and institutions, high ongoing cost. Now, let's move into the informational and social layer, because this is where humans misunderstand persistence the most. Models and institutions can look stable because they're abstract, but they are often among the most maintenance-heavy structures we have. A model persists only if it continues to match reality closely enough to remain useful, and that means it requires constant updating, correction, and boundary checking. A good model is not a trophy. It is a tool that must be sharpened. Institutions are similar. An institution is an agreement encoded into procedures, rules, and enforcement. It persists only if those procedures are repeated reliably, if enforcement remains legitimate, and if incentives don't rot the structure from within. Institutions drift. They accumulate bureaucracy. They can become self-serving. They can lose touch with the reality they were designed to manage. So institutional persistence requires continuous auditing and reform. Without maintenance, institutions do not remain neutral. They degrade into whatever low-cost attractor the incentive landscape permits. And there's a deeper PIW point here. High ongoing cost is a signature of systems that are not sitting in a constraint-stabilized basin. They are perched. They are held up. They are kept coherent through active attention. If attention disappears, so does coherence. That is not cynicism, that is system dynamics. So, in the first arc of this video, we've established a rule. Life, machines, civilizations, fusion regimes, and human institutions persist by maintenance. Their persistence is real, but it must be constantly bought. Now we cross the boundary. Section 6. Atoms' persistence by constraint. Atoms are one of the most important examples of persistence by constraint because they are not maintained in the everyday sense. An atom doesn't need an external repair crew to remain an atom. That's not because atoms are magical. It's because the allowed states of an atomic system are constrained. Quantum structure doesn't permit arbitrary continuous energy configurations for bound electrons. The electron states are quantized. The nucleus provides a binding potential. The result is that once the atom exists, it sits in a stable configuration that cannot decay arbitrarily without obeying strict conservation and transition rules. This is what constraint persistence feels like. The universe itself prevents the easy pathways to destruction. An atom can be ionized, sure. It can be broken apart in extreme environments, sure. But under ordinary conditions, the atom is extraordinarily stubborn. It is not stubborn because it fights. It is stubborn because most routes out are forbidden or improbable. The structure is maintained by the structure of the law space itself. And that flips the intuition. In the maintenance domain, persistence requires continuous input because the environment naturally dissolves the structure. In the constraint domain, persistence happens because the environment naturally permits the structure, sometimes even prefers it. Atoms are not constantly repaired. Their stability is built into the allowed configurations of matter. That doesn't mean atoms are eternal. It means their default behavior is to remain in stable states unless acted on with sufficient energy or interaction. Their persistence is passive, not active, and that's an enormous difference. Section 7. Crystals. Persistence by constraint. Crystals take the atomic story and scale it into geometry. A crystal is not just matter. It's matter arranged into a repeating lattice, because that lattice is a low-energy configuration under certain conditions. Crystals form when the environment allows the system to shed energy and settle into an ordered state. Once formed, they can be remarkably stable, not because they are constantly maintained, but because the lattice is an energetic minimum or near minimum. The structure is downhill. This reveals something deep about persistence. If a structure is an attractor, if many paths lead into it and few lead out, then persistence becomes cheap. The crystal is a configuration that the system tends to return to after small perturbations. Small distortions can relax back. Defects can exist, but the overall lattice remains. It takes strong disruptions, high heat, high pressure shifts, chemical alteration, to destroy the ordered state. What's important here is that crystals show persistence as geometry under constraint. The rules of bonding, energy minimization, and lattice formation constrain what patterns are likely to occur and persist. A crystal does not need attention. It needs suitable conditions. Once it has them, the structure locks in as a stable pattern. The maintenance is performed by energy minimization itself. So crystals are a kind of persistence that is the opposite of civilization. Civilization is high-order structure that must be held up against decay. A crystal is high-order structure that is a natural resting state under the right constraints. Section 8. Orbits. Persistence by constraint. Orbits might feel active because things are moving, but orbital persistence is one of the cleanest examples of stability enforced by conservation laws. An orbit is a pattern that persists because energy and angular momentum constrain the allowed motion. A planet doesn't need continuous fuel to keep orbiting. It keeps orbiting because, in a central gravitational field, the geometry of motion plus conservation creates recurring trajectories. Now, orbits aren't perfectly eternal either. Tidal dissipation can change them, drag can decay them, perturbations can destabilize them. But what's striking is how much persistence you get for free. Once an orbit is established, it can last for millions or billions of years with no active maintenance, because the system is not fighting against the constraints. It is moving in a way the constraints permit. This is a major theme for PIW. Motion itself can be persistent if the law space makes it so. You don't have to hold a planet in orbit the way you have to hold a skyscraper together with constant repair. The orbital configuration is dynamically stable under the rules of the gravitational system, and deviations often do not explode. They circulate, precess, and remain bounded. Orbits are persistence as a dance created by constraints. The system doesn't need attention. It needs the absence of disruptive forces beyond what it can absorb. And that's why orbital structure is one of the deep timekeepers of the universe. Section 9. Black holes. Persistence by constraint. Black holes are the extreme endpoint of constraint persistence. A black hole is not merely a dense object. It is a region where escape routes are removed. The defining constraint is geometric. The causal structure of spacetime is altered, such that within the horizon, outward paths no longer lead outward. That's why black holes feel like the universe's ultimate no-return structure. In terms of maintenance, a black hole is almost the opposite of life. Life requires constant work to resist dissolution. A black hole requires almost no work to remain a black hole. Once formed, it is stable because the horizon is not a surface you can chip away at with ordinary processes. The black hole can accrete matter, merge, and grow. It can lose mass through Hawking radiation over incredibly long timescales. But in the regime of ordinary cosmic time, black holes are persistence monsters. Their stability is enforced by geometry and the constraints of the field equations plus quantum effects. What makes black holes conceptually important is that they show a persistence basin so deep that the environment feeds it. Matter falls in, information becomes hidden behind horizons. The structure doesn't need babysitting. It is the universe's way of locking mass energy into a configuration that is extremely hard to undo. And that's why black holes belong in the constraint half of this talk. They are high formation cost structures that, once created, stop needing attention. Their persistence is not because they are strong, but because the law space makes the exit routes scarce and slow. Section 10. Geological structures. High formation cost, low upkeep. Finally, let's bring the same idea down to Earth. Geological structures are another form of expensive to create persistence. Mountain ranges, stable cratons, large-scale stratified rock formations, and certain mineral deposits may require enormous formation processes, tectonic collisions, volcanic cycles, sediment deposition over millions of years, pressure and heat transformations, and chemical sorting across deep time. The formation costs are vast, but once formed, many of these structures persist for extremely long periods because they are locked into stable configurations. A mountain range will erode, yes, but erosion is slow. A craton can remain stable for billions of years because it is thick, cold, and mechanically strong relative to surrounding mantle dynamics. Certain mineral lattices and rock structures persist because they occupy stable basins of pressure-temperature chemistry space. The Earth is a machine that slowly remixes itself, but not uniformly and not quickly. Many structures survive because the pathways to erase them are long, indirect, and rate-limited. Geology is a great demonstration of the PIW thesis that persistence is often a story about constraints plus timescales. You don't need to invoke anything dramatic to explain why a structure lasts. You just need to look at the environment's ability to do the work required to remove it. If the removal processes are slow, the structure persists. If the undoing is expensive, the structure persists. If the system is stuck behind a barrier, energetic, mechanical, or chemical, the structure persists. Section 11. Why some structures stop needing attention. Now we can say the rule cleanly. Some structures persist only by continuous maintenance because they are not favored by the environment. They are held together against the drift toward equilibrium. Life, machines, civilizations, fusion regimes, and many of our abstract systems live in that category. Their persistence is expensive, active, and fragile. They survive by paying a constant repair and coordination tax. Other structures persist because constraints make them stable once they exist. Atoms, crystals, stable orbits, black holes, and many geological formations persist because the law space restricts easy escape routes, or because the configuration is an attractor, or because undoing the structure is slow, rate-limited, or energetically blocked. In those cases, persistence is cheap after formation. The system stops needing attention because the universe itself does most of the stabilizing work. So the punchline is not what is strongest. The punchline is what is cheapest to keep. Persistence is a budget story. The universe selects what can be afforded under constraint. And that's the deeper reason persistence isn't intensity. It's not about how dramatic something looks in the moment. It's about whether the structure lands in a regime where it can keep existing without constant rescue. When persistence is maintenance heavy, the system survives only while it can pay the bill. When persistence is constraint stabilized, survival becomes the default. My name is Charles Carroll. Thanks for sticking around and listening to this. If you're building your intuition for PIW, keep watching for the recurring pattern. The universe doesn't preserve everything, only what can survive the constraints and the costs. And next time, who knows where the science might take us?